time and disappeared, they all had one thing in common, and that is that they had forgotten from whence they came. And AA never wants to forget its primary purpose. It never wants to forget it's all about recovery from alcoholism. Nothing else. And all of these other things that I say we have in common in terms of recovery, we are separated because we need to be separated. Overeaters need to gather together to support one another in their overeating. Alcoholics need to gather together in the support of each other in their non-drinking. Gamblers need to do what they do about not gambling, and so on and so forth. Even though the recovery portion of it is all the same, we still need to be focused on what our primary purpose is. And in our case, it's recovery and nothing else. Recovery from what? Alcohol. So, in the scheme of things, we have the steps, and the way those steps are set up, we see that the statement of the problem is stated in the first step, isn't it? We're powerless. And the answer to our problem is found in the second step, and that's power. And then we have a planned program of action, that's step 3 through 11, which brings about this result, a spiritual awakening. Now that's on the individual basis. And if you'll know, and Charlie brought this to my attention a few years ago, and it just made magical sense to me. He said, have you ever noticed that Bill Wilson had the same rhythm in most of his writing? Of course, I wasn't a student of writing, and I don't know, but it does make sense to me. Because when he pointed this out to me, he then pointed out to me that the traditions have the same rhythm. That the statement of the problem for AA groups is found in the first tradition. That's a statement of our problem. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on us being together, not separated. And so if we could all agree on that, we wouldn't have anything to fight about. We would understand why we have traditions. Common welfare, coming together, being as one. Many being as one. Many moving in the same direction. Many thinking the same way. And this is a statement of the problem. And it's sort of like we must hang together or die separately. And when I was talking about today about stepping out on the skinny branches, I didn't mean this. This guy's, he's about to saw it off. Our individual sobriety depends on the group, and the group depends on us. We soon learn that unless we curb our individual desires and ambition, we can damage the group. And see, this came from experience. They didn't just have a board meeting one day and say, well, we need a bunch of traditions. What can we do? No, they were having experience knowing that if groups didn't hang together, they were going to die separately. They needed one another. They needed the support of one another. They needed that unity. So that when somebody came into the room that had been directed there by the jails or by somebody else to come to an AA meeting, when they walked in there, there was no doubt what was going on in there. Recovery. But in the beginning, they could have been coming in there and some insurance salesman could have been making a pitch to all of them to get group insurance. Or he could have been talking to them about the poker game that needs to take place as soon as this meeting's over. Oh, we're going to do that too. I don't know where that came from, but some groups did that. Poker meeting, poker games, bingo, jukebox. I'm a Pepsi Cola representative. I want to put my machines in here. Hell, I'm a Coca-Cola man. I want to put my machines in here. No, you can't. Yes, you can just see what was going on. And some poor slob coming into the meeting to get sober, here's him arguing about decaf and regular. So, regular. Yeah, I figured as much. So you see, that is a statement of the problem, common welfare. Now let's look at how this works. Second tradition is the answer to that problem. This is how we as groups answer the problem of how we stay together. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. There we go again. It's God, isn't it? Same thing in the second step. It's God. Here we go. Ultimate authority. A loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. What is a group conscience? That's where the members of the group sit around and make decisions about where you're going and what you're doing. And when you decide, and when you have a problem, you get together and decide what you're going to do about it. The solution to the problem of unity is the authority of a loving God as He expresses Himself. We have trusted servants. We have a spirit of rotation such that once you fulfilled your obligation, and it's usually short term, no more than a year, sometimes 2, then you move on. It's designed that way. It's designed so that just about the time you get to know what you're doing, get out of the way. It's designed that way. They want to keep us dumb and happy. But we always have a full discussion and then a group conscience about something. You know, you get a group in there and you say, well, what's it going to be? Is it going to be Coke or Pepsi? Let's take a vote. Then, of course, we have to talk about the attributes of Coke versus Pepsi. And then we say, well, let's have a vote. And it's 6-5. Guess what? 6-5 Pepsi. That's the way it works. The Coke man says, well, at least we tried. We'll come back next month. We never give up. We have no big shots. We have no small shot. One shot and we're all shot. See, this is the group conscience stepping on the ego here. All right, so we now have the problem stated as common welfare. The solution is a loving God as He expresses Himself through an informed group conscience. I say that. It's not necessarily the way it is, but... And then we said, what are the areas that we have the most problem in? Our experience taught us something. Remember, in the very first edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, in the foreword, it said something to the effect that the only requirement for membership in this society was an honest desire to not drink. Of course, they've since removed honest, but that's what it said. And they knew they were in trouble in this area because even though they had said that in the book published in 1939, groups were being set up with all sorts of member regulations, protective regulations they call them, and which some groups would not allow so-and-so to join. If you had other problems, you couldn't join. If you were the right or wrong skin color, you couldn't join, and so on and so forth. I mean, this was the days of the 40s where we thought we had to protect ourselves from each other. And so they saw this going on, and Bill and that bunch at the foundation office in New York City decided, let's write these groups that we're in correspondence with. Let's have them send to us all of their protective regulations about membership. And so they did that. So they sent them all in, and as they began to be looked at and laid out on the table, Bill and that bunch that was looking at them, they were just almost to tears because they looked at them and they said, you know what? If all of this stuff was applied in AA as a whole at one time, I couldn't even be a member. Such was all of that stuff. So they knew that there was a problem there. So they had to take a position about membership. And as groups got to know about this, that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, then if you had a drinking problem and you could have any other problem in the universe, you could come into Alcoholics Anonymous and claim membership. It doesn't matter. So, because we had, there's a great story about Bill being called in the clubhouse when he was living at the clubhouse about somebody downstairs that wanted to come in. And Bill, it was raining outside, and Bill didn't want to go down. And Bill says, well, who is it? The guy says, I don't know. But he's got orange hair. He's a man, and he's wearing a dress. Well, Bill says, well, have him come on in. So he did, and it was an example of that other stuff doesn't matter. If he's got a drinking problem, have him come on in. So you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous whenever you say you are. And think about this. If we could all agree on that, you are a member when you say you are. If we can agree with that, would we have anything to argue about? No, never. So that's the problem that they started out with, and they said, what's next? Well, one thing that's next is that they said we got to let these groups determine their own destiny. A lot of groups were started back in the early days at the direction of somebody. They say, now listen, we're doing this over here. I want you to go over there and do that. And we have a speaker meeting over here, so you got to have a discussion meeting over there. And the next thing we want to do is have a step meeting, and that's what you're going to do. So somebody was calling the shots about what a group could or could not do, and sometimes General Service Office would get a letter from somebody. Say, we want to start a speaker meeting in Pompano Beach, Florida. Can we do that? Well, hell yeah, you can do that. You don't have to ask anybody because each group is autonomous, and that's a $10 word for meaning self-governing. Each group can determine and should determine its own destiny. It doesn't have to get permission from anybody as to what to do next and how to set up a meeting. There are all kinds of groups. There's big groups. There's small groups. There's offbeat groups. So we have offbeat groups. Don't get your panties tight about it. Listen, we go to places and when we say, my name is John, I'm an alcoholic, everybody says, hello, John. Wait till you go to some place where they don't do that. My name is John, I'm an alcoholic. Silence. What did I do?
Hey, John.
I mean, you get so accustomed to the way it is, then you go to a strange place, and when it's not the way you think it is, you get all excited and upset, and you start saying, they're not doing it right. Have you heard any of that from your out-of-town visitors? Y'all don't do it right here. Each group is to avoid any action which may harm any other groups in AA, but our fellowship has its sins. Groups should take an inventory once in a while. Groups should take an inventory just like an individual does, once in a while. Maybe once a year in January. Just sit down with a then steering committee or whoever the officers are and say, what is our mission here? We are, are we online? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? Are we keeping our word with the community when we say we're going to do this, that, and the other thing? How are we handling newcomers? How are we handling sponsorship? How are we handling the rotation? And so on and so forth. You take a group inventory. It's healthy to do that. So, do it once a year. The next area. Tradition 5 said each group has but one primary purpose. There's another pamphlet that says this: sobriety, freedom from alcohol, through the teachings and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. And that's a pamphlet that Bill wrote. Sobriety, freedom from alcohol, through the teachings and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. And then it says here, each group has but one primary purpose. That is to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Are you an alcoholic? Do you still suffer? You got to bring me the message. Bring me the message. We're never exempt from a message. Never. But sometimes we think we are. We think we're above it. We're all bound together, one common responsibility, and that's to carry the message to the sick and suffering alcoholic. And I love this statement that came out in one convention. Which one was it? Which one?
65.
60 something another.
65 Toronto.
65 Toronto. Kevin, I'm glad you're there because I'll be looking at you for some answers. But it says, I am responsible. When anyone anywhere reaches the hand out for the hand of help, I want the hand of AA to always be there for that. I'm responsible. Take it on. I am responsible. And you are too. But sometimes we get the attitude that we're a big outfit and we'll let somebody else take care of it. Them, those, and that'll handle it. Just leave me out of it. We do one thing well and we do it better than anybody else. That's why we have singleness of purpose, so that we don't get confused with anything or anybody else. We're not an employment agency. We're not a finance company. It's not a welfare department. Not a housing bureau. All we have is one message. We can tell you how to recover from alcoholism. And we don't know. We're using the guideline of the book, right? It's the book. It's not us. Then we have, next, a tradition which says that an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise because we'll have problems of money, power, and prestige which will divert us from our primary purpose. And this came about because we started referring to things called AA clubs. And in the beginning, remember, we wanted to be all things to all things. In the beginning, if you'll find a copy of the original manuscript, if you look at the 12th step, this is what it'll say. Having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we will try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and practice these principles in all of our affairs. And what they're saying is, we're going to carry this message to everybody, but especially alcoholics. We're going to focus there, but we ain't stopping there. That's what they were saying. That's what they thought they could do. They thought they could be all things to all things. And you know, if you try to be all things to all things, you wind up being nothing to nobody. Experience showed and taught us that we could not be mixed up with anything or anybody. Washingtonian society was a great teacher in this area. They looked back at their history and saw they got diverted. They got distracted. And a whole society lost its way. A society that was doing good work. Now, if we could all agree on this, that we won't lend or endorse anything or any outside enterprises, if we could all agree on that, we would not have anything to argue about, and we would therefore have unity. Seventh tradition has to do with money. Each group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. Remember the story of John D. Rockefeller? Were we looking for a touch on that boy? Well, weren't we trying to put the touch on him? Trying to get some cash. Trying to get some stuff. Made a report. Man went in there and says, I think you ought to give him $50,000. John D. in his wisdom looked at it and says, I think money will spoil this thing. So we went from that thinking to this thinking, based on experience. Each group ought to be self-supporting, declining outside contributions. We take care of ourselves. We don't need outside help. That's what separates us from every other society that I know of. They're always got their hand out, don't they? Help, donate, and all. It's just amazing. And I've seen a lot of things in AA go to hell in a handbasket because of money. Not in AA, but I'm talking about AA supporting things. I'm talking about things that started out as helpful tools for alcoholics. Then money became important to everybody. And then the next thing, get a little government involved in it. And you're no longer calling the shots. Whoever's given the money is going to call the shots. Whoever pays the money calls the tunes, pays the piper. So, and this is who we've been before we came to Alcoholics Anonymous on the left side. gimme, help me, gimme. But part of our personal recovery comes from making ourselves responsible. Making our own way. Not asking anybody for anything. Because we're not lacking in anything. We can get anything and do anything we want to. We just don't know it. So as a group, we don't do that. If you're accepting free rent for your group meeting, I'd say on the surface it looks like you're accepting an outside contribution because you're not paying your way, especially if you pass a basket. Because the only reason we pass a basket is to pay for these limited expenses we have. Very limited. Little literature, better pay for the rent, get a little coffee, maybe a cookie or two. But in my group, it's expensive cookies. We have expensive cookies. And remember that next time you come there. So we will pass that basket. So we have very limited financial needs. And the only place that AA and spirituality, money and spirituality mix is in that hat. That's the only place that mix. Money is needed for on one purpose, and that's to carry the message. And if we could all agree about this, because have you ever been to a group where you have say Sid has been a member of this group for 15 years, and Sid always sits in this chair. He's there. That's his chair. Don't sit there. That's Sid's chair, for God's sake. And then one day, Sid's not there. 15-year member, Sid's not there. Somebody makes an announcement. Sid's not with us tonight. He's over in the hospital. He had an attack of appendicitis. Oh my, what can we do? Well, why don't we send Sid some flowers and a box of candy? Good. Mary, you're the treasurer. Take care of that. Wrong. You don't use AA's money to promote Sid's sickness. If you want to do that, which I think is a great idea, you say this: Sid's in the hospital. We think it would be a good idea if we sent him some candy and a bouquet of flowers. Now, all of you who know Sid, we're going to pass the basket now, and if you would like to contribute some money to pay for these flowers and candy, that's what we'll use it for. It has nothing to do with the basket we just passed a few minutes ago for the group. See how that works? I've been in groups before that they wanted to use group money to do that kind of nonsense. You just don't do that. And I know it sounds, if you don't know about traditions and what holds us together, because the next time you're going to say, well, listen, I'm a little short on my rent. I need about $35. Oh, we can't do nothing about that. Well, what the hell? You did something for Sid. Right? See what it can lead to? And then somebody over here will hear that and say, well, listen, I don't have any gas in my car tonight, and I got to get home. Oh, you just get distracted with all that kind of stuff. So you just don't never do that. Money can kill us, and John D. Rockefeller knew that. That's why he refused to give us any. Here's one that talks a little bit about money in another way. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. You see that poor slob there? That could be tonight. Somebody's going to get this call tonight. I mean, it's that kind of weather we're having there. And you're going to be saying, we had a 12-step call at the corner of Atlantic Boulevard and A1A. Can you get over there? He's waiting for you. Who's next on the list? You sure you're talking to me? I think John moved. He left. No. But who's got that thing? Anyway, give it up. No one could pay me to go out on a night like this. That's what he's thinking. But he says, okay, I'll be right over. He's thinking, I don't want to go, but he knows his obligation. He's got to go. Now, the idea of having paid workers and professionals, in our service centers, we do have coordinators and secretaries and things like that. And they need to be paid a healthy wage. Whatever the prevailing wage is for that kind of work, they need to be paid that. They don't need to be paid 40% less than that just because they're members of AA working in an intergroup office. They need to be fully paid for what they do. And so we take this position on an individual basis. We have freely received, we freely give. It hasn't cost us anything to get sober. Well, it has, but you know what I'm saying. If you apply what's given to you freely, you will live a life unimagined. And here's what I've found out, but yet it still seems to be prevalent. We got a lot of paid workers that are counseling alcoholics about recovery. They're called something else. And I'm not downplaying them. I guess they have a place, but not in recovery. Who's the better expert? You want to listen to somebody who makes $40,000 a year, who has never been an alcoholic, but has a psychology degree, that's going to counsel you about drinking? But are there many of them around? Yes. Yes, there is. And we like that. I don't know what it is about our psyche, but we like to have a doctor. We like to have an attorney, my doctor, my therapist. You can tell that I'm shy when it comes to giving you my opinion about things. Those who labor for us in our service offices, etc., are worthy of their hire. You know, in the beginning, they got this from the 24th Street Club. They had a guy that was working there, and they needed some cleaning up around there. And this guy, this alcoholic who had been coming to meetings there, they says, "How would you like a job?" "Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind." He said, "We want you to be our janitor. We want you to keep our place clean." He said, "How much you going to pay me?" They said, "Well, pay you? You're a member of AA. This is the 24th Street Club. We didn't pay you nothing." And he said, "To hell with you. I ain't going to be your janitor then." I mean, that's who we were in the beginning. "Oh, you're in the confines of AA. You should do this for nothing." No, we don't do that. If we could all agree on this statement, we should remain forever non-professional. If we could agree about these things, we wouldn't have anything to argue about. But I know we have things to argue about now because we do have that stuff. Number 9. Now, boy, I'll tell you something. AA as such ought never be organized. Don't worry about it. We'll never violate that one. Never. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about this one. We ain't never been organized. But we have a structure. We have a service structure. And guess who's the boss? You and I. You and I, man. You can't beat that. We're the boss. This thing is inverted. The power lies at the top, and it's you and me. And then it filters on down to that general service office up there, where they have a chairman of the board up there. Man, I tell you. Those who take part in AA service work are assuming responsibility, not taking authority. Remember that. And you might want to tell your delegate that one day. They're not ambassadors. They take on a responsibility as message carriers. That's all they do. They go to one level in our general service office once a year, get information, give information, and They come back to their area and report to the DCMs and the ACMs, et cetera, and they have communication that way. And then these folks at the area meeting, who are the DCMs, et cetera, go back to their districts and report to the GSRs, feedback, input, et cetera, and then the GSRs go to the group. Business meeting, GSR raises hands. "I have a report to make." And that's the way it works. And you're asked your opinion, usually before April, about certain issues that are going to be taken up so that they can give you some feedback. Some people think that they can tell their delegate, this is the way we want you to vote by God. And then, but it doesn't work that way, because they have a right of decision, is what it's called. They have a right to say, and it makes sense. Maybe we don't have all the information here when we're telling her to do that. She may go to the next level and get information which says, my group said no, but this makes sense. I'm going to vote yes. And she's got a right to do that. So we trust servants. We don't tell them what to do. If you can't trust them, don't elect them. Simple. And then number 10, if we could all agree on that, and as I say, don't worry about that one, because we ain't never going to be organized. The 10th tradition talks about we have no opinion on anything outside of recovery. We're experts at that, but we got no opinion on anything else, so don't bring it in the confines of a meeting. It doesn't make any sense. But this is see that group at the bottom? This is a group that said, if you want what we have, matter of fact, this looks like the last business meeting I was at. We have no opinions, and anything outside of recovery from alcoholism is an outside opinion. Does that make sense? And so, why this is that way? Is so that the newcomer, you got to always think about the new person walking into your meeting for the very first time. He has a right to expect that we're talking about recovery. And you and I ought to have a right that when we look at a when and where we send somebody to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, they're not going to think they're in the Republican club or the Democratic club, that they're not sitting there fighting over trivial bullshit stuff. And you know what I'm saying? I'm telling you that you got to think about the newcomer. We get so entrenched in our little petty stuff in a group, and we got egos just clashing with each other. So, the Washingtonians taught us a lesson about this, these outside opinions, the slave issue, the wet-dry issue, all sorts of issues. We don't bring that in here. That's why, and if we could agree on that, we wouldn't have anything to fight about. That's why some of these folks, they get all upset when they come in and they want to mention a certain deity in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and somebody jumps on them about that. Well, we're not anti-religious. We're just saying, hey, we don't want to confuse the newcomer. There's a place for that, and it ain't in here. Then the last step of non-action, we have to have a public relations policy, you and I, in a society this large. And here's the good news, and here's the bad news. Most of us will never, ever have a chance to violate this tradition. I just can't imagine anybody wanting to put anything I have to say in the paper about recovery. And no TV cameras. Now I have been had a camera crew standing in front of me in Australia. We were doing a deal down there when we were big shots, not big shots. We were the Yanks down under. And we were there for a function. And they wanted a frontal. I said, no, we can't do that. No. Here you can get us from the back. Or you can put shadows on us. But we have a tradition that says we cannot be revealed at this level. At this level. Now, in our AA meetings, I'm John Williams and you're Susie Parker or whatever the case may be, but not at the level of press, radio, and film, and TV. So it made sense to them once I hammered it into them. And they said, we'll shoot you from the back. I'd say that's my best side anyway. So we have this public relations policy, and in the pamphlet called Problem, in the pamphlet, the illustrated version of the traditions, perfect instructions on how to handle that kind of an interview. As I say, most of us don't have to worry about that. Just ain't going to happen. And so if we could agree on that, if we could agree on this, and you know, this came about too because we had some early violators of this tradition. And Bill Wilson was one of them. He loved to have his picture in the paper. He had an ego like the rest of us. And there was a guy from Cleveland, Ohio who really loved to have his picture in the paper. And he liked to take credit for inventing AA. So he had a run in with the General Service Office a lot. But, you know, if he could just agree with this one, we wouldn't have had all the disputes. This came from experience, folks. This isn't some board meeting, let's dream up something. Now, all of that stuff brings about a result. And the result is that if we do those things, if we all agree on our traditions, understanding what the problem is and understanding what the solution is and understanding those areas that we need to agree upon so that we have no problem, we will have what is known as spiritual anonymity. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us that this is a society of principles, not personalities. And your group is a group of people who are of principle and not personalities. So, now let's look at that in the context of what I put up there about the steps, the order, the rhythm of the writing is what we call it. In our traditions, we know that unity is a problem. How are we going to hang together? How are we going to be cohesive? And then the answer to all of our problems is found as God as being the ultimate authority in our decision-making process. And it's called a group conscience. And then we start entering into the areas where we don't fight with each other about it. We just accept these statements, and then we won't have anything to argue about. And that has to do with what is the requirement for membership. Very simple. It's not a complicated process. Autonomy, if we can agree that each group has a right to determine its own destiny, that we have one primary purpose, that we never endorse, finance, or lend, and we are self-supporting through our own contributions. We have no professional AA people, that we're never organized, that we have no opinions on any outside issue, that we have a public relations policy that's guaranteed to promote principle, not personality. All of it leading to this thing called spiritual anonymity, the ability to give of self, expecting nothing in return. Because all of these traditions are asking some ego maniac like myself to temper myself. I don't have to run the group, but I do. And I don't have to... I had a tinge of guilt there. Because I feel around me people who are saying, this applies to you too, John. So I'm in trouble. Now, there's one other area we need to talk about. You will even find in the concepts the same rhythm. We know the steps and traditions, so let's move to the concepts. Look here. The concepts are written in the same way. How do we express ourselves and how do we solve problems at the bigger level, world level? The General Service Conference, they meet once a year, take care of all that stuff. Whatever problems arise, whatever future decisions they need to make about the future, they all come up there. And then we have these interactions between our World Service and our, what's the other one? Grapevine? Grapevine. The interaction between the corporations of AA. Right of decision, right of participation, right of appeal and petition, so on and so forth. These interactions bring about our warranties. But it's the same rhythm, is what I'm saying. And we're not going to get into concepts. It's just way over. Get into service and do that. Yes, service manual explains it better than I ever could, I can tell you that much. So, now, that's just an overview of what it is that holds us together. Okay? Now, next what we want to do is I want to get my remote. I went on vacation last summer and I have some nice slides that I think you might enjoy. There, that one. Push it this way, all the way, all the way, all the way. Okay, so I want to just go through a few of these folks that you probably have seen around the walls. Now, Kevin, are you ready to? Because I don't. I know, but I'm getting a little older now, and I've had this problem for the last 2 days, as a matter of fact. So, but that is William James. He's the guy who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience. That's the book that I told you about that Abby brought to him right after he'd had his spiritual experience in Towns Hospital. He was a guy that the Emmanuel movement, remember that in 1900s, the psychological people, they used William James as a source of information. In the mid-1930s, our co-founders were very much influenced by the likes of Emmett Fox, especially this book, The Sermon on the Mount. At the back of this book, you'll find an interesting dissertation on an explanation of the Lord's Prayer, which I think is excellent. But this was some of the things. This is the book that influenced our co-founders, just so you know where they were coming from. On the left, you will see Roland Hazard. He's the businessman that we read about on page 27 in the big book. With him is his mother in the middle and a friend on the right-hand side. Roland Hazard he's the guy that went with Carl Jung for a year and interviewed and counseled with him, came back to this country, got drunk, went back again. And Carl Jung told Roland Hazard the only thing he could suggest is to come back to this country, immerse himself in some sort of a spiritual movement and hope for the best. And then he came back in and this is the guy that talked to him about that. This is Carl Jung. He's quite a man. He's also gave us another thing that I'm familiar with, a term called synchronicity. Synchronicity is where two seemingly unrelated forces are at work, and they come together in some kind of something or another. And we've all experienced this stuff. We've all experienced it. Has your phone ever rang and you instinctively know who was calling? Yeah. Have you ever thought about somebody that you hadn't seen in a long, long time and then within 48 hours, there they are? That's synchronicity. Okay. You've had some.
That's spooky. That's what that means.
This is Zebra Graves. Zebra is debonair, mid-1930s, kind of a suave guy. But Zebra Graves and Roland Hazard were friends, and they were both members of the Oxford groups. Now, Abby Thatcher, a friend of theirs, was in Manchester, Vermont. He was sent there by his father, who was the mayor of Albany, to paint the house for the summer. Just get out of our hair and do something. And so he finished painting the house, and he had already been in trouble in Manchester once or twice, and he was told, if you get in trouble again, you get drunk again, Abby, you come before me again, I'm going to put your butt in jail. And lo and behold, after Abby finishes painting his house, he goes downtown to the bar, gets snoused, comes back home, runs into the house with his car, but he notices as he gets out of his car that there's a bunch of pigeons on his house that he just painted. He went in the house and he picked up his shotgun and he came outside and started blowing them pigeons off of his house. So you know somebody called the cops. They come and arrest Ebby, take him down before the judge. Enters Zebra and Roland Hazard. They say, Judge, they're members of Oxford Group. They're out, they're out doing their stuff. And they say, Judge, listen, we think if you let Ebby come with us, we can do something for his drinking. And so they did. So the judge released Ebby into their custody, and Ebby started going to the Oxford Group meetings. The interesting thing about it is that this guy, his daddy was the judge. So no wonder they let him in, weren't they? Synchronicity on it.
What's his name? Zebra? Like his deer?
Now, Towns Hospital, New York City. This is where Bill attended 3 times. The last time he was there, December 1934, he had his spiritual experience, and he never drank again after that. He passed away in Miami Beach Heart Institute in January of 1971. Frank, who used to do this presentation, said that building is still there, but it's full of vagrants and drunks. So, in one way or the other, it's still being used. Frank Buckman, he's the guy who started the Oxford Group movement. And he's the one that I told you about that had his experience in England where he heard a message that changed his life forever. He was operating at that time under a big resentment that he got in Pennsylvania at the school that he was a teacher. So he's the one, he believed that everybody needed a spiritual regeneration. That was their pitch. And it didn't care whether you were Catholic or Jew or Protestant, it didn't matter. We all needed a spiritual regeneration, and that was his whole purpose with the Oxford groups. Now, these are some of the little pieces of literature that the Oxford group had, and they, as I told you the other day, the reason that they thought they would sell a lot of AA books was because the Oxford groups were selling a lot of their books. They were doing real well, making a lot of money. And they said, well, we got one even better than that. We can sober up drunks with this book, and everybody ought to buy one. But of course, everybody else didn't feel that same way. So this is the first page of the Oxford Group book, and the reason that it's there, and you can't read it, I can't even read it, and I'm closer than you are, is that you will see that the requirements for membership, this is where we got our preamble. No membership dues, anybody can belong, etc., etc. So these are the ideas from whence we got our preamble. That we were open to everybody, and so were they. Now this is the Calvary Church. This is where Ebby went eventually. Ebby left Manchester and came to New York City, and he was at the Calvary Church. And while he was in the Calvary Church, he started hearing these stories about his old buddy Bill. He's getting drunk, and he was an embarrassment to Wall Street. He couldn't keep a job. He couldn't do nothing, and they were trying to run him off of Wall Street. So while he was there, he decided, I think I'll call my buddy Bill. And he did call Bill Wilson in, I think about early November of 1934, and wanted to come over and see him. And Bill said, well, come on over. Good to hear you, and come on over. And so when Ebby got to there, he knocked on the door, and Bill stumbled to the door to meet him and says, come on in and have a drink. I think Bill was drinking gin and pineapple juice. Now there's a mix. And Ebby says, no, Bill. He says, I'm not drinking anymore. I've got religion. Oh, and Bill being an agnostic, and he heard that, the hairs went right off of the back of his neck. And he figured to himself, well, my gin's going to outlast his preaching, so come on in. But Ebby went in, but he could just see by looking at Ebby that there was something different. And Abby had been sober just a short period of time, but yet he looked sober. And Bill noticed a change, and he couldn't deny the change. And so Abby came in and told him about what was going on in his life. He hadn't had a drink in a few months now, and he belonged to this Oxford group. He got religion, and he said, well, how does that work? And Bill probably didn't ask him. He probably said, have a drink. But Abby kept refusing, and he says, this thing works this way. We got to admit we're licked. We got to admit our sins, and we got to make restitution, and so on. And so he gave him 6 of these little principles. And so Bill was impressed, but of course he wouldn't let him know he was impressed. And this is Sam Shoemaker. He was Bill's, probably you could say Bill's spiritual advisor. He was the guy who ran the North American Oxford groups. Well, what connections we have here. And he also ran the Calvary Church. That was his church. This is where Ebby was. And Bill went to some meetings there in this church with Ebby. Bill and Lois. And now Bill goes and gets sober in December 34. And then for 5 months after Bill gets sober, he's doing a good job. He goes around trying to find somebody else he can talk to. He goes around all these bars in New York City. He goes in these bars and he says, boys, he says, you need to talk to me. He said, I've had a vision. And them drunks look at him like, the hell is wrong with that guy? He had a vision. I don't care about no vision. So nobody was listening to Bill. But it didn't stop him. He kept going, he kept trying, and he kept talking to people. And of course he kept going back to Towns Hospital. One of his earliest proteges was Hank Parkhurst. We heard about him Thursday. But he didn't have any luck, so in May of 1934, he gets a chance to go to New York. Remember the story I told you the other day? All right, so I'm not going to go through it again. But while he's there, he fails. This is a picture of that church directory that he went to that Sunday afternoon, and he started calling these people. And one of the names on there was a Reverend Walter Tunks, Tunks, and he was in charge of the Oxford groups in Akron, Ohio. I'm telling you. And then Walter Tunks gave him a list of names to call, the last of which was Henrietta Seiberling. And he calls her up and says, I'm a rumhead from New York looking for another drunk to talk to. And she just right away said, come on over. And so that was the beginning. See, all of these forces are at work, happening. And here's the guy that treated Bill in Towns Hospital, Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silky, they call him. They really love this guy. He's the one that wrote the doctor's opinion in the book. So the next time you read it, think about that guy. This is the Knickerbocker Hospital. This is the other hospital in New York about the time that Bill got sober. This is where
Silkworth went after they shut down Towns Hospital.
Yeah. This is the next hospital for Dr. Silkworth because they shut down Towns Hospital. Thanks. It's probably still there too. This is the entrance to the Calvary House. This is where the likes of Ebby Thatcher went to live, and this is where they had meetings and so on and so forth. They like to feed the homeless there, and Bill went there one time. He was about half shot, and they called for witnessing in the service, and Bill felt a strong need to get up and say a few words. And before Abby could grab him by his pants, he was up and he said a few things, and nobody ever remembers what he said, but he forgot about it the next day. This is Walter Tunks, great friend of AA. Henrietta, this is the one who says, come on over. I'll play you a tune. She lived in the gatehouse, not in the mansion. She lived in the gatehouse. She and the old boy were having a little problems. I think she and the kids lived in the gatehouse. There's a picture of the gatehouse. A gatehouse. You know, when I think about a gatehouse, I think about a shack.
gatehouse of where?
If that's the gatehouse, I wonder what the mansion looks like. There's a picture of Dr. Bob and Ann. This is the guy that Henrietta knew she had been praying that morning for guidance about this guy. That's why she said, come on over so quick. Because he was a doctor in Akron, Ohio that she knew, and she knew she was having problems. They were all Oxford group members. They'd been to meetings together. There's a picture of Bill and Dr. Bob, and you can tell that came out of a newspaper. You can look at the print. Nice ties. Yes, you did. What's the matter with you, Billy?
Trying to get the right number so I can play cards.
Oh. Which hospital is that? St. Thomas Hospital. Is that the one Dr. Bob and Sister Ignatius worked with 5,000 drunks? Right in that facility. That's the third member of AA right there, Bill Dotson. He's on the wall right there too. Same picture. He was an attorney from Kentucky who liked to beat up nurses. There's Sister Ignatius. That she's banging out a tune on the old piano there. Yes, you bet. That's Rosary Hall right there. I got it on good authority. That's Leonard Strong. This is Bill's brother-in-law. The mic's off. What happened? Uh-huh. You did it. It's your fault. Bring me a hand mic. Bring me a hand mic. I don't care. Just bring me a hand mic. This thing ain't here. It ain't working.
You are.
I am. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Give me a handheld. This thing is not over. 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 This thing may be over. Okay. We got it? Ooh. All right. Now. So all of you guys who left, come on back. This will be your last chance to take a shot at me. Leonard Strong, this is Bill Wilson's brother-in-law. He's the guy who Bill went to when it seemed like nobody understood what they wanted to do in terms of raising money. He thought all these rich people were short-sighted. So he went to see Leonard Strong, his brother-in-law, and told him about it. And his brother-in-law had a friend who was connected to the Rockefellers. His name was Willard Richardson, and this is him. Strong called Willard and told him about Bill and what he was doing. And this guy says, well, send him on over, we'll have a chat. And he went over there and had a chat, and they decided to have another meeting. And at that meeting, they decided to have a third meeting in which they would bring alcoholics, and then he would bring, this fellow here, Willard, would bring some of his cronies from the Rockefeller Foundation, and they'd have a meeting. It was at this meeting that Bill made his pitch about the books, the missionaries, and the hospitals. And it was at this meeting that he heard the same objections that he had heard in Akron, Ohio, when they decided to do all this thing. They thought that hospitals were a big business. They didn't need missionaries. They couldn't afford any anyway. And after all, they didn't need any literature because the 12 apostles didn't have any. So, but they were impressed with what they heard that evening. And it was at this meeting that they decided to send a man, his name was Frank Amos, to Akron to do a study about us. And we'll get to Frank in just a moment. This is a rare picture of Dr. Bob and Bill together. Frank always reminded me that it seems like that the draperies and the ties seem to match. This is the Dr. Bob's home in Akron, Ohio, on Ardmore. This is the house that Dr. Bob lived in when Bill came to visit with him. This is where Bill stayed in the summer of 35. This is where, if you contribute money by buying dust jackets and raffle tickets, the money goes to help maintain this building so that we'll always have it. Because it was about to be torn down and made a parking lot of a few years ago until my sponsor Wesley heard about it, and he started a movement which it ultimately wound up to being the foundation so that they would not lose this house. This is Hank Parkhurst. He was the unbeliever in the first edition. He was the guy who had red hair and an idea every minute and didn't waste any time getting things done. He's probably, if you read the story, you got to say this guy probably had more to do with the writing of that book than most folks. Of course, he was motivated by the idea that it was going to sell more than them Oxford Group people. He's going to make some money out of it. Hey, but God intervened. That is a blank. There's Frank Amos. Frank Amos is the guy that went to Akron, Ohio, made some visits and talked to some people about AA, went to meetings, found a place that could be converted, went back to New York, and made a recommendation of $50,000 to get these things started. But John D. Rockefeller had other ideas. This is J.D. himself. I wasn't that close to him, but John D. Rockefeller. He had more money than he knew what to do with. But he was a guy who saved us from ourselves. He knew that the eye-to-eye, the man-to-man approach that was working with us would be spoiled with money, and he said so. He didn't give us any money, but he gave us an awful lot of prestige. He gave us his cronies. He gave us his men. He gave us a dinner in 1940, in which made world publication. And so he gave us a lot of credibility. So thank you, J.D. Friend of mine. Ruth Hock, Dutch, they called her. She was the girl that did the typing of the big book, the manuscript, etc., as Bill dictated to her from chapter titles, the book called Alcoholics Anonymous. She's the one who typed it. And she was presented with the 1,000,000th copy of Alcoholics Anonymous at the convention, one of the conventions. It took us a long time to sell 1 million. Now I think we sell 2 million a year. We're on the move. This is that place in New Jersey that Hank Parkhurst had his office on William Street in New Jersey. Now this is in New Jersey. Bill lived in Brooklyn. It was a long way for him to travel, and this is what caused the argument later in 1941, I think, or 40, that Hank got drunk over the argument and dispute of this. Bill wanted the office to be closer to where he was, since he was doing all that kind of work. And Hank wanted Ruth, and he wanted his furniture, and he wanted his office right there. Honors Dealers. I mentioned that Thursday. This is that little outfit that he put together, probably to try to get even with Standard Oil. All but 2 chapters of the book were written in this building. So it's an important building. But apparently it's still there. Those cars don't look that old. Now there's Bill. He probably just came from one of those meetings where they argued about what to go in the book. He's very pensive. He's if this picture was clear, he's got rubbers on his feet. It must have been in the winter or something, and then he's got a hole in one of them. So, but this desk is now located. It's called Whit's Inn at their home in. What is it? Not Rolling Stones. What is it? Stepping Stones. Okay, Eugene Exman. You need to know this guy because he was the guy who edited the Big Book and the 12 and 12. But he's the guy that Bill went to see who asked him if he could write an entire book using the same style that he had used those 2 chapters. That was his story, and the chapter There's a Solution. Bill said, I think I can. And he said, how long do you think it'll take? He said, about 8-10 months. And then this guy made an offer to him. He says, if you think it'll help, we can advance you $1,500, which we'll take from the royalties once the book is published. Well, it sounded like a great idea at that time because they were broke. Bill wasn't working. And but on his way from there to tell the trustees of the good news, he got to thinking that a society such as ours ought to own its own literature. And if he took the deal that Exman offered him, the book would be owned by them. And so the trustees said, take the deal. Bill said, I don't think we need to. So they didn't make any decision about it at that time, thank goodness. Works Publishing Incorporated. This is a copy of one of those certificates that was validated eventually, and which they sold 200 to members of Alcoholics Anonymous at that time. They had to eventually purchase them all back for $25 each. But this is a copy of one of them. It's a canceled stock certificate from Works Publishing Incorporated. You remember when Morgan, the guy that was going to be interviewed on the radio on the Gabriel Heater show, and Hank had a brilliant idea to send a postcard to all the doctors and physicians east of the Mississippi. This is a copy of that postcard, and the bottom one is one of the 12 they got back. They ordered that this was the one order for the book out of all of that money. But Hank was thinking, he was a promoter. This is Fitz Mayo. He's the guy who lived in Washington, was the son of a preacher. And when they got time to name the book, there was a kind of a dispute about what to call the book: Alcoholics Anonymous or The Way Out. And so they were kind of close. Bill liked Alcoholics Anonymous. It seemed like, most other folks liked The Way Out. So Bill gets cunning, and he sends a telegram to Fitz Mayo, who's living in Washington. He says, Fitz, go over to the Library of Congress, and I want you to check and see how many books there are entitled The Way Out, and how many books are entitled Alcoholics Anonymous. So the next day he gets a reply from Fitz Mayo in which he says, there are 12 books entitled The Way Out. There are no books entitled Alcoholics Anonymous. And so everybody decided they didn't want to be the 13th way out. So they got the name Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill was sly, wasn't he? He'd get it done. Well, there was no argument once he got that telegram back. Emerson Fosdick, who was the preacher at the Riverside Church, which was Rockefeller's church, he also wrote a report on the book after it was published in 1939. It was a real glowing report, about the only one we got. Yeah, he's the guy who administered that $5,000 I told you about Thursday, when Rockefeller was told of the plight of our Dr. Bob and Bill. He says, I'm going to put $5,000 in the church, and these boys can draw on it as they see fit, but don't ever ask me for any more money. This is the Wilson Inn in East Dorset, Vermont. This is the home of Bill's. This is Bill's birthplace. He was born in the living room. There's young Tomer. Now that's the other place that the foundation supports. Bill's birthplace and Dr. Bob's home in Akron, Ohio. Now that place looks a lot different than that because they have made a lot of renovations and just brought it up to snuff. You can go there. You can go there and spend the night, folks. You know, and go to meetings there and so on and so forth. You just have to it's like a bed and breakfast place. Dr. Bob. A very, very studious portrayal of him. Pensive look. There's the King Street School where Dr. Bob used to have his home meeting. And as a matter of fact, this represents the first time that they had meetings in places other than a house. In a public place. They've since moved the King Street meeting to another place, but they brought along, now here's what they had in this meeting. They had a Bible in this meeting. Now that probably wouldn't work in your group and mine, but it worked for them at that time because they got a lot of their spirituality out of the Bible. Matter of fact, Dr. Bob's wife Ann read to them every morning out of the Bible. And as a matter of fact, there's a story that goes on that early on these guys kept a fifth of liquor on the mantelpiece to remind them of what they were trying to overcome. I don't recommend that to anybody. This is Bill W. visiting a prospective member in a hospital. It's another man on the bed picture. The one that we've got on the wall is a famous picture, the color. Dr. Bob and Bill talking to the man on the bed. Now this is the home of T. Henry Williams and Clarice Williams. This is the house where they were Oxford members. They were not AA members. They were Oxford people. They didn't have any drinking problem. But they opened their house up for these Oxford meetings. And this is the home where they made that decision in the fall of 1937 for Bill to go for the whole package of the hospitals and the missionaries and the books. This is some early pamphlets from Alcoholics Anonymous. Back in the days when we had a controlled amount, we didn't have to worry about a lot of pamphlets. But this Father Dowling, he brought AA to St. Louis, Missouri. He was one of Bill's spiritual advisors. Met Bill one rainy night when Bill and Lois were living at the 24th Street Club. This is a picture rendition or painting of the entrance to the club. At the top, there was a sign that says "The Last Mile." That's something I think you'd see in a prison or something, but there it is. It looks kind of cozy, doesn't it? Fireplace and so on. I have no idea what we're missing. Now these are replicas, or these are copies of checks that finally Alcoholics Anonymous paid everybody back who had given us any money, including John D. Rockefeller. They paid him back in full. A couple of checks to John D. Rockefeller. Then there's a check on the bottom to Charles Towns. Towns gave us a lot of money and supported us in the beginning, gave us some contacts. I mean, there was a lot of people working on our behalf at that time. This is Marty Mann, first woman of substantial sobriety in AA. She got sober by reading the manuscript. Didn't have the book at the time, but she got sober reading the manuscript. And she also was responsible for starting the Alcoholic Foundation.
National Council for the Education of Alcohol.
she was responsible for that too. Well, she was big in education. She wanted to get people informed about alcoholism, and she was a great worker. This is a rendition of an early proposed copy or dust jacket design. It's not quite anonymous enough. We like red and orange on the first one. This is the picture of the first international convention held in Cleveland, Ohio. From the back. Notice all the pictures from the back. You don't see the faces. Wasn't a big gathering. You could compare that to what you'll see in Toronto this year. Here's a picture that appeared in the newspaper. I think that's Dr. Bob standing. Bill Dotson is to his left. That's the bottom left of the picture. Lois is the female on the right side of the man standing, and that's Bill Wilson on the far right. And out in the audience, you see people. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but they all seem to be holding up a napkin or a handkerchief to their face. Of course, what they're doing is they're being told by the photographer, "We're going to take your picture, so cover up." But you know what it really looks like is a group sneeze. We were by this time we knew something a little bit about anonymity. This is he's the guy who helped Bernard Smith. He's the guy who helped Bill formulate the concepts, et cetera, et cetera. He was an attorney, but he was also chairman of the board of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is Bill at the Rockefeller Hotel at one of the first conferences held. You know, from 50 to 55, it was on a trial basis, and then 55, it was turned over to Alcoholics Anonymous because it worked. This is a picture of Bill and Lois at Ann's funeral. So this was in the early 50s. This is Bill. You can't see it, but Lois is sitting at a piano. Bill's got a fiddle in his arm, and he's a self-taught fiddlist. Just trivial stuff in case you get asked these things on Trivial Pursuit. This is Bill's house on Clinton Street in Brooklyn, New York. This is where Lois and Bill lived. At the time he got sober, but they soon lost it and had to move into the 24th Street Club. Bill and Lois, you talk about a rocky road in their first year or two of sobriety. They had a rocky road. It's amazing to me that a man like he made it, given the circumstances. I mean, they were humiliated. They were kicked out in the street. They were living in a room and at the club, and people took up with them. They gave them cars. They eventually gave them a house, and that place they bought at Stepping Stones. It was just, you could see things unfolding for this man, and all in the right way. And he never worked again. He didn't have to work. He had a job. His job was given to him by God, and that was to minister Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the Lasker Award that we received, and then no, it wasn't dropped. Just that's the way it is. That's what it looks like. They offered this thing to Bill, but he turned it down because it would bring on publicity that he didn't want.